Hey again, everyone. Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker and coach. So happy to be with you here live on the Experience Maker Show. And today, if it's been one of those long weeks like I've had where it didn't actually feel like a holiday week, it was just everything was crammed all together. And so things just kind of went faster and my brain started hurting. Well, guess what? We're going to hurt your brain big time for the next half an hour because we got a crazy smart individual as a guest today on the show. We're going to be diving deep into data and analytics and customer experience. And don't walk away or run away because you're afraid of numbers. Don't worry. We welcome everybody here. We're going to talk numbers in a way that everybody can understand. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a New York Times best-selling author. He is the senior vice president, and I need to ask him about this, distinguished principal analyst at Qualtrics. Welcome, Luke Williams. You are distinguished, sir.
You know, they let me make up my own fancy title, and I was like, what words could I put together that guarantee that nobody would know what it is I do in exchange for money?
I absolutely love that. And I mean, I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone have the name distinguished in their title, but I think it fits perfectly.
In the tech world, it just means you're over the age of 35.
Outstanding. So if you could quickly just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and also a little bit about Qualtrics.
Yeah. Distinguished principal at Qualtrics. I've been at Qualtrics now 4 years. That's 28 dog years to regular folks. But I've been a user of the platform since probably about 2009, 2010. I came up in the research and consulting world. And when I first started using Qualtrics, it was primarily a survey platform. And then they slowly, over 10 and 15 years, started adding really cool features and things that I could really use in my consulting business. And then before you know it, they kind of figured out what it is that people were doing with the platform and said, hey, if we engineer, our product mindset towards helping people solve really big problems, we'll get from A to B faster, and they can, use that leftover time to do bigger things, right? We can be a part of that value cycle. So we've established with the lightning strike, I think the first ever idea around experience management, that there's experiences around us everywhere in the world flowing through our companies, and that the better that we manage those, the faster we get the profit and the customer gets the value. And that's primarily what we build technology for, as a programmable technology layer now. And I think as we move forward into the future, I think the definition of what traditionally we think about measuring and actioning on experiences will ultimately end up changing as a result of the diversity of opinions that we're getting inside the company now. So that in a nutshell is shortly what Qualtrics does. We're a part of the SAP family. And honestly, it is the type of place that you work makes your socks roll up and down. It's a pretty great place.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And full disclosure, I do some work with SAP and really enjoy the people there are great. The thought leadership is amazing. So it makes sense that they would have snapped up Qualtrics and you get to partner with them now. You guys use this term XM, which I really kind of like, and you mentioned experience management, and I know it includes sort of two different parts. Can you explain the math behind it?
Yeah, so experience management is the discipline of bringing what we refer to as X data and O data together inside of your ecosystem in order to really understand what's happening, right? So there's two types of data in the world. The first is operational data. This is the one that companies tend to be very rich on. They've spent the last 60 or 70 years perfecting things like supply chain, CRM, HCM, all the kind of binary zeros and ones, the management of the business. And companies, frankly, have had to get really good at that. Historically, this is where SAP thrives. These are the type of systems you couldn't live without. You couldn't possibly scale or be competitive without them. But at the end of the day, to be fair, the market's very saturated with that. We measure, whether people are going to the bathroom now in contact centers. There's more than enough telemetry going on the O data side. But what we didn't have was a system of record essentially for why things were happening. So experience management brings in the human aspect of those very experiences. And as we started to apply them to different use cases, what we started to figure out is the predictive power of data. People started to really understand what was the value of understanding supply chain and human resource capital management. What they figured out was all the things that couldn't explain revenue and profits, according to those numbers, was explainable by why things were happening. So what we've discovered essentially is that if you combine O data and X data together, the predictive power statistically of what you're looking at explaining the future is about 90%, which means I'm only leaving 10% up to chance in competition if I do things correctly. And ultimately, that's the nature of what experience management is. It is, in fact, yes, it's bringing more humanity to the business, which is great. But just speaking for me personally and not for Qualtrics, I'm a numbers guy, right? Like my goal is to make money for businesses and to help them thrive. And I believe that customer experience, for example, is a source of competitive advantage. So let's be good to customers, but let's do it in the right way that earns value for the customer and the company alike. And experience management is a system engineered towards doing exactly that.
All right, so understanding the operational data, because as you said, I think people have been collecting that for a while. Let's dig a little bit deeper in terms of the experience data. What kinds of things are you looking at? Are you talking about survey data in terms of what customers are saying? Are you talking about tracking them on the website in terms of what customers are doing? Is it some combination of that? Give us a little insight on it.
Following you to your car, it's surveilling your phone. No, it's not. It's none of those things, right? So I think traditionally people think about experience data as having come from surveys, right? This is, traditionally the voice of the customer. These are your employee engagement programs. This is brand tracking. This is product testing, concept testing, things like that. But I think what you're seeing companies like Qualtrics do, leaders in the experience management space, is we're starting to push on, okay, survey data is great. It's one form of X data. There's maybe 3 or 4 others that are really available to us. It could be just pure text that you get through SMS text messages, reviews on websites, product reviews. It's also through voice. So we're capturing information inside of contact centers. How do we, instead of sending 40 million surveys in a contact center, we can have a complete census of what happened, because the technology exists in the AI world now to have voice to text, sentiment-based analytics and things like that. And then ultimately, I think when you're thinking about what is the future of X data going to be, the more complete, even things like focus groups and qualitative, scalable qualitative data sits inside the X data realm. And as you start to expand on traditional methods and create technology out of traditional methods, you arrive at a place, because technology only does 2 things. It takes the things you do and make them faster. And then eventually you start asking different questions as a result of having done those things really fast. So the next question we ask is, well, like, as we've tapped out on that, what does the future of X data look like? Can we collect experiences without ever having to talk to a single person? Can we use things like bioinformatics and biotelemetry, for example, as a vector to understanding the experiences that we're delivering in store? Certainly, when you look at leaders in the experience world, it's not futuristic to them. This is exactly what, we've noticed, like, through the security system that we have in our hotel, that somebody's in a position that they're not supposed to be. There's somebody standing in a position that algorithmically doesn't make sense. They may need help. So it doesn't matter why they're there. We just know they shouldn't be there. Like, go send a person to figure out what do they need help with, and then let the human solve the problem, empower the front line. And I think we're getting away from this mindset of performance measurement only and started vectoring towards, like, what is the action? What is the outcome? What value are we going to create in the moment? And that sounds really easy to do. It's actually incredibly difficult to do well, or to make technology to do that well. So it's honestly, it's why it eats our days and nights. But the outcomes that we see are exactly that. We want to push the space forward because most people don't understand how most of their tech works. They just know that it creates value for them. And that's, experience management is technology for regular humans. It's not just for researchers anymore, which is traditionally where these types of platforms lived. But I mean, everybody needs to understand what's happening in their business and why. So for me, it's way past surveys. Surveys are important. Surveys are a critical tool. Surveys will never die. But the misuse of surveys must die in order to preserve its value, right? There are moments where, like, you just need to talk to customers. You need to do focus groups. You need to do in-depth interviews. You need to be able to witness. The easiest way to learn about a business is sit inside the contact center and just take 150 calls. Just sit there and listen. And your mind processes things and internalizes things and creates vectors and data that you couldn't actually imagine or map, but it becomes intuitive. So the goal is to create data at scale that allows us to have that intuitive insight without having to sit through 150 calls. And that's,
see, I love that you say that, though, because here you are, you're the quantitative guy. And I find too that, even the name voice of the customer is a little bit of a misnomer, because you're really generally reading something that the customer either said or wrote. You don't hear their voice. You don't hear the tone of their voice. You don't hear the intonations. And when I've done call listening and sat, even if I'm not answering calls, if I'm just hijacking in with an agent, it is absolutely amazing to hear customers and to get close to them. Or you do a focus group, or you pick up the phone if you're a B2B and you only have 100 clients. Pick up the phone and call them and talk to them. And it is amazing what you can extract out of that. Yeah, it's a little bit harder to put into an algorithm, but I think what I'm getting from you, even though you are making my brain hurt like I promised, is that it's really a combination of lots of different inputs. And if you're depending only on a single input, then you either could be making wrong decisions, or you're making decisions simply without seeing the whole picture. And when you can bring in all these different inputs together, that picture becomes a lot clearer. And technology allows us to sort of solve the problems objectively at taking emotion out of it, which I think is really critical.
Yeah. So for anybody who's on LinkedIn watching this right now, I'm sure you'll check out my profile. I'm an analytics and research methods guy at heart. That's where I came from before I started doing strategy work. But I think the reality of where we are now is that quantitative data absolutely gets you into most rooms. It can absolutely get you into a C-suite. And in some cases can actually do all the convincing for you in a C-suite. But I've had plenty of experiences in my consulting life where it's the qualitative story that finally commits people to taking human action, which is, I think, why we're focusing so much on creating more humanity in the data. One of the challenges that we have, right? So I was working with, here's an example. I was working with an insurance company not super long ago. And, we can show them the driver model that suggests the thing that's driving the predominant amount of pain inside your customer base is you've got this snafu in the billing problem. And, the CFO says like, yes, we know billing's an issue we're working on. It's a big investment. We're going as fast as we can. Honestly, this has been a years-long problem and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, I've shown you all the data to get into the C-suite. I've told you, I've sized the problem for you, the percentage of people who are affected by it, the percentage of people who experience pain. But what I'm going to do now is show you a video of what it looks like when a person, a single parent, for example, receives your bill that they shouldn't have received because it was covered, but you rejected the claim. And now they think that automatically, because they received this bill, that they owe this money. And they're starting to break down crying because they're having to make a choice between making a mortgage payment or paying the insurance, the insurance bill or the medical bill. It's like when you see that person crying and trying to cry quietly so their 3 kids don't hear them, all of a sudden the person's like, okay, I get it. Like, it's not that I'm creating pain in my customer base. It's I'm creating pain in the human world. And the more we create human stories, and for me, there's 1,000 ways to do it. For me personally, it's quant and qual together. In the data world, we refer to this as triangulation. Using triangulated methods is the most effective way to tell a story because it covers every angle for every version of human understanding. Like if you're the type of person who sees it and takes the quant data and runs with it, we have that all the time. Like we got tons of clients, or tons of people in the world who want to receive information that way. But the way that I describe it to people is that you have to fish where the fish are, the way that people want to be fished. Like some people need a story. So if that's what gets the job done, if that's what gives you permission to take action, you give them what they've got to have. And for me, you can't come with one tool to anything that, like any serious decision, $50 million or bigger. You better have it right from 1,000 angles.
I don't want to veer too much off here, but you remind me of something in my own career. My first boss out of college went to the same college that I went to, was 4 years older than I was. We got along great. And I used to go into his office, sit down, shoot the breeze, throw out a couple of ideas at him, take his temperature. He'd be like, yeah, I really like this one. And I'd leave and I'd go do it. And I loved that because I just loved having the conversation. And later on in my career, I started doing that with a different boss of mine. And every time I went into her office and said, hey, I like this idea and this idea and this idea, she'd shut down all of them. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, these are great ideas. And I finally figured out that that was not the way she liked to be communicated with. And so instead, I went back to my desk. I created a one-pager on each of these 3 ideas, made it really crystal clear why I was doing it, what I wanted to invest, and what I thought the outcome would be. Went back to her. She approved all 3 of them immediately. And it was just because I was presenting it in the wrong way for her. Whereas my first boss, that was exactly the way that he and I communicated with each other. And I really took that learning to remember that anyone I'm talking to, a boss, a client, a business partner, a colleague, you have to know how people want to be communicated with if you're trying to convince them of something. And you're right. There's some people that are very right-brained and only want to see the numbers and aren't, no matter what you do, they're not going to shed a tear when they see that lady cry. And then there's the other people that need to see that human story to really be pushed over the edge. And then maybe the numbers are the confirming factor, but the story's actually the lead. And so I think it's great that what you guys are doing is is presenting both sides of it so that the client or the business can really choose how to talk about it with whatever person they're trying to convince. And sometimes you may need only the X data, sometimes the O, and sometimes the combination.
There's I'm going to mash this up. It's going to be terrible. There was a quote from Mark Twain, right, from Samuel Clemens, that was more along the lines of, there is no difference between the illiterate and someone who's literate and doesn't read, right? So for us, the data are extremely powerful. That's sort of like the mitochondria of this whole thing, is having the data, having the insight that you can create from contextualizing those data together. But if you can't deliver that to somebody in a way that is designed or oriented or aimed directly at an action, you're not getting the full value of that data. And then it becomes an investment whose ROI is not fully realized. And in a business environment today, I mean, everyone says today, especially, like, this has always been true, that, we go through waves of levels of scrutiny, right? People become profligate for a while, then everybody tightens down for a while, but at some point in time, you got to pay the piper. And there's no better way to call budgets into question than to have lots of things that you don't know how to use. So for us, it's not, our goal is not to force people into a world where they have to communicate in terms of technology. The technology has to wrap around the business problem, right? And it has to wrap around the user. It has to be something that is material to their everyday. And I feel like that's probably true for a variety of technologies, but I think that's just generally true for anybody who wants to run a business, right? You could be a florist, you could run a hotel, you do whatever you want. If you can't figure out where you fit into the customer's value chain, you're going to have a struggle. And you can see it all the time. And you probably have, 30, 40 examples just from the last month of where, there's a retailer out right now. It's on my list of people who I don't like very much. Essentially, like their whole thing right now is like, we're only, we're jammed up on calls. So we're only taking calls if you're calling to cancel an order. I'm like,
that's good.
You must have a lot of money in the bank.
That makes a ton of sense. Yep. Yeah. Or there's a particular brand that I happen to really like and order from a lot that's been out of a particular product, in and out of inventory since COVID started. And there's literally no communication. I have to check the website every day and hope that it's in stock today. Otherwise, I check it again tomorrow. There's no like, we'll let you know when it's back in stock, or there's no, why don't you sign up and we'll ship it to you every month as long as we have it. There's nothing. It's all left to me to figure out whether I need to, whether I can order it or not. And it is immensely frustrating. And I think one of the interesting things for me, I'm interested to see if you've seen this as well, is that at least in my business, since COVID hit, customer experience has just been absolutely brought to the forefront in a way that, those of us that have been in CX for a while have sort of been shouting from the rooftops, and now everybody's sort of focusing on it, which of course is a great thing. But I think it's a lot of it is because customers have been hypersensitized, good and bad, to the experiences that they're having right now. And what I keep telling clients is that the experience you provide right now, when the chips are down, when things are tough, when people are stressed, is going to have a huge impact on whether they decide to continue doing business with you when things are good again. What have you seen in the last 6 months since we got into this mess that has changed in terms of what you see your clients doing or how you see customers reacting?
I think I would speak just more generally about the market, the way that I see it. I think a couple things are true. I don't think anybody has to explain what digital transformation is anymore. I think that's a fairly pedestrian observation, but it bears repeating because we still have lots of people in the marketplace. You cruise on websites, you hang out on LinkedIn, you hang out on Twitter, and you see what service channels look like, and you can see that there's a lot of stress and people trying to figure out how to put this plane together while flying it. I think people who had already sort of started down that path are probably in a better space. These are the people who intimately understand that there's a connection between the digital experiences that we're delivering and the amount of contact center volume that we're getting. Like because we're not investing correctly over here, we're generating costs over here, right? And then the other thing I would say is, I think from a actual consumer standpoint, I think it's been most interesting. we saw this spike in forgiveness, right? Right after COVID, we saw people were much more willing to forgive a brand for all these types of issues. Whenever this is true of humanity, when life hits the fan, people get real nice. Like, listen, I get it. Bigger issues in the world. Go home, hug your kid. Like, don't worry. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Not a big deal. And honestly, striking up a personal conversation, having a personal connection with somebody on the phone on the customer care front line can actually create loyalty in that situation, even though you completely failed to deliver on every aspect. But like all things in humanity, like people are like, all right, well, it's been 6 months. What's with the delay? Like, you haven't figured out your supply chain in 6 months? And I think there's a lot of misnomers about what people think is happening in the market right now. I think people think that the market's tightening when the data don't really suggest that, right? So as many people who have spent less have spent more. So 70% of the market is spending exactly the same or more than they did before. And I think that a lot of people also see that if you've gone through this for 6 months, that most of the change that's going to have happened has already happened. But that's not true either, right? Something like 25% of the consumer base out there in the world is not only having not yet changed, but they're actively looking to change, which means 25% of market share everywhere is basically up for grabs, right? So I think the thing that I want to impress on people listening the most is it's never too late to pick up a shovel, right? So if the best time to plant the tree was 100 years ago and the second best time is today, then just go. And you don't, if you're looking for data to make investments, or if you're looking for data just to reconfigure how you're already investing, right? The data probably exists. Companies generally only care about 5 levers in the business, right? It's always going to be like market penetration, share of wallet, average customer value, cost, and time. You can target all of your efforts to at least 2 of those things. So I think, for me, that's been the most astonishing, is that companies have started to reconfigure like what it means to be in a defensive posture. And then how do we sort of we expect this cycle to go down, some kind of scientific breakthrough, some kind of market breakthrough, something that these things are going to take off. Like, the people who are going to be ready for that are the people who are creating red teams right now, who say, Dan, your job right now is to assume that the pandemic has ended. How are we going to be competing when we start accelerating out of this thing? And I think the best competitors in their markets have already put together those teams. So I think they're the ones who are thinking really forward about what the future of customer experience has to be. Where are we going to land on the other side of this? Have we figured out that the way that we were running their business was not as swift as it could have been? Are there better ways for us to do this? I think that's what I've been most struck by. And the other thing I would say, just on a personal note, is just how resilient people are. People are really just hanging in there. There's a lot of folks, myself included, you're very fortunate to get to work from home. And a lot of people who aren't directly affected, their job isn't personally affected or whatever, have family members who are affected. I think the level of humanity that the world has displayed has been, with everything going on in the world, I still think is high. I think everybody can settle on the idea that certain medical threats to the world, whether it be cancer, whether it be infectious disease, like, everyone's on the same page about them being bad, which means we've got a place to start from. So, that's kind of like my personal takeaway on the world right now.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that is, and certainly if that is not the exact reality, particularly in the United States, it should be. And so I'm with you. One thing I just want to add, and then I'm going to shift gears for a moment, is that besides from looking beyond COVID and what your company is going to be doing when we are finally out of this, which I think is exactly right, Luke. I think part of that is actually around what are we doing right now during COVID that we're going to continue doing after COVID? Because a lot of the things that we're doing right now, we didn't plan on doing. We've heard all these stories about companies taking their 5-year plans and executing them in 5 months. We've seen a lot of digital adoption. We've seen things like curbside pickup, which wasn't even in the nomenclature 7 months ago, become commonplace. And it's certainly my belief that a lot of this is going to continue when we have a vaccine and this is in the rearview mirror, because people have gotten used to the convenience. People, even a guy like me who loves grocery shopping, it's like, man, this pickup thing, this isn't bad. I save an hour and a half a week. I may continue to do this. So I think look for the place in your business that you have pivoted to during COVID and try to figure out whether it's something you want to keep doing. In my own business, because public speaking isn't exactly the most popular thing to do right now, I've had to pivot into other areas like CX coaching that I love so much. I can't wait to continue even after COVID as another part of my business. So, again, where is that in your business? Try to give that some thought. So, Luke, I want to pivot to one more thing because we only have a couple more minutes. This is the fastest half an hour on the internet. But when I introduced you, I happened to mention that you were, just kind of threw in there that you were a New York Times best-selling author. And your book is called The Wallet Allocation Rule.
Mhm.
I would like if you would tell us what exactly is the wallet allocation rule.
The wallet allocation rule was a mathematical discovery that, like all good math, basically explains the world in a formula that a regular person already understands the world as behaving that way, right? So like all the biggest discoveries are like ways of like framing a thing that everybody kind of already figured out, but just didn't quite sort of put verbiage on it. So the wallet allocation rule essentially was a mathematical discovery that we discovered what was the connection between the metrics that we collect in customer experience and customer share of wallet. And essentially, like there's a Greek formula. It's in the book. You can find it on Harvard Business Review. It's all free. None of it's black box. But essentially, the English sentence of the wallet allocation rule is that there's two things that influence how customers spend their share of money. And it's just the number of brands that they use and how they comparatively rank against the competitors that are being actively used, which makes total sense. Like it doesn't matter. Like I need to focus on people, right? So when we think about benchmarking, the problem that we've had historically in benchmarking in CX is we say, well, this number is connected to X, every point is worth $1. It's like, well, how could that be true? Because not every point is the same. These are sentiment-based metrics, right? So until you brought it down to a unit of analysis that actually is material in the world, you're not going to have like a reasonably observable change. So because people are like, oh, if your NPS score goes up by a point, it's worth $100 million. It's like, that's insane. My NPS score goes up 5 points a week. I made $500 million extra. That doesn't, I mean, if it did that, the stock market would have crashed 1,000 times, right? The reality is that when you actually look at that on a respondent level, an actual human, Dan's opinion of a company may have changed, but it didn't sufficiently change in order to change his behavior with the company. That's what I care about, right? So my goal, if I want to create change in the world, has to be to understand what are the drivers of change. How does Dan understand his competitive use set, and how does it compare to the 3 million other consumers in Chicagoland? Because I'm trying to go capture that market. What percentage of the people in that market think I'm the best? Not that my score is higher or lower than Whole Foods, but like how am I competing on a personal basis? And this is where I got into trouble with like one or two clients where you find out it's like, oh, my NPS score is 85. Now, there's nothing wrong with NPS. NPS is a hugely important metric that helps people stay focused on customer experience, right? But you have to contextualize it. So like if I'm dealing with a financial services company that deals in wealth management, our NPS is 85. It's off the charts. It's like, no, it isn't, right? I mean, you think about what it is you're managing. You're managing people's ability to retire. Their expectations are pretty high. They're not going to actually stay with you as a client unless you give them a 9 or a 10. And my question is why is it that we're seeing people split apart their wealth management? Why is it I have 2 separate wealth managers that I'm paying 2 separate fees? Why am I doing that? Because I'm constantly testing the water, and maybe your 9 isn't as good as the 10 that I'm going to get from this person over here. So the wallet allocation rule was essentially a mathematical approach to understanding like what are the drivers of behavior versus the drivers of sentiment, because they're not always the same thing, right? So ultimately, when we think about that, what makes people happy, makes people spend, it's got roots in Kano, it's got roots in Dirichlet, it's got roots in lots of different mathematical circles. But at the end of the day, my goal is to drive behavior. And drive sentiment as well. And if I can't drive sentiment yet, I'll start by driving behavior because it'll create capital for a business that can create better experiences later. But right now I want to create differentiated products and experiences. And whenever we think about really tight markets, it's because these scores go up and down, but nobody's changed position in the market. And that has to happen in order for a company to realize ROI, at least for share of wallet. Like approaching brand penetration is different. Right, this is like the Ehrenberg Bass, School of World, distinguished artifacts, that whole 9 yards. But these are all really important material things because if you're doing things to create better experiences that aren't creating more money for the firm, you're just generating costs. So what ends up happening is that people stop believing in customer experience, which is the worst thing that can happen because everybody can control supply chain, everybody can make a steak, everybody can get your package from A to B overnight. Right? Like the world is competing on customer experience right now. And there's a lot of things that feed into it: the employees, the product, the brand, how we design for human systems. And that's where I'm focusing my time. Honestly, right now, it's an uphill fight. Always will be. I only like big problems. So that's
I
where
love
I'm
it.
at.
Thank you so much, Luke Williams, SVP, and I'm going to call you the brain crusher of Qualtrics because my brain is ready to explode. But really good stuff. I love it. Thank
Not
you
a
so much
compliment.
for taking the time.
Not a compliment.
I always learn something from you when we chat. So thank you so much. Next week on the Experience Maker Show, we're going to have another really smart dude. I only find smart people to be on the show. Mitch Jackson, who is a California trial lawyer, but also the author of The Ultimate Guide to Social Media for Business Owners, Professionals, and Entrepreneurs. And I actually got to write a chapter for that book because he had something like 45 people write 45 chapters for this book, which was pretty cool. So he is the lawyer, the social media lawyer, and we'll have a good time talking with him. Bring your legal questions, and we'll try to answer them for you. So, hey, this is Dan Gingiss, customer experience coach and speaker. Really appreciate you joining me on the Experience Maker. We're here every week, Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you next week. Have a terrific weekend.